The whiteboard was still dusted with chalk. The kids were quietly listening as he told them a story about kindness, about how to be human. Then the door flew open. A white figure stepped in. Police officer. White, eyes sharp as knives. He scanned the small classroom, smirked. "This place, huh?" he said. "Helping anyone at all? Or just a clubhouse for losers?" The man didn't yell, didn't argue. He simply turned around, slowly, and one by one, every child in the room stood up, stood with him. The officer flinched. He stepped back just slightly, because what he didn't know, the man he just insulted was once the most dangerous CIA operative in America. Welcome to Mr. Seven Stories. If this is your first time here, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe in justice, in truth, hit like, subscribe, and follow the channel now. Today's story begins. And this isn't just a confrontation. It's a lesson about arrogance, about silence, and how a generation can rise without a single gun. On the southern edge of Bridgetown Haven, Illinois, where old red brick buildings had faded from time and prairie winds, there's a narrow street called Maple Hollow. The streetlights flicker like they're torn between shining bright or giving up. In the middle of that street sits an old building, its hand-painted sign peeling off the wood, Horizon Bridge Center. Locals call it the Halfway House of Hope. But few know that the man who founded it was once one of the most dangerous men in America, a CIA operative named Malcolm Easton, now simply known as Mr. Easton. He's 54, tall, walks with quiet authority. His salt and pepper hair is neatly trimmed, and his eyes, they're the kind that cut like a scalpel, but soften like a fall sunset. The eyes of a man who once lived in a world where every choice meant life or death, and now chooses to teach a kid how to tie his shoes with dignity. No one in Bridgetown really knows his past. Some say he saved a hostage in Eastern Europe. Others whisper he was betrayed on a top-secret mission. But he's never confirmed a thing. To the kids in the neighborhood, he's just Mr. Malcolm, the one who teaches life skills, self-defense, and most importantly, self-worth. Malcolm didn't create the Horizon Bridge Center to prove anything. He opened it because he felt he owed the world something, a way to give back for all the places he'd passed through and never returned to. That small building used to be an abandoned warehouse. He rebuilt it with his own hands, one step, one ceiling beam at a time. Every morning, he brews coffee in a dented aluminum pot, lays out the same printouts from last week, and opens the door for anyone who needs to learn how to stand tall in a world that leans crooked. People in this neighborhood aren't rich, but they have pride, and Malcolm respects that. He doesn't preach, he guides. He doesn't command, he listens. To teens the world calls troubled. He doesn't see problems. He sees potential. Once, when someone asked why he chose to live in a forgotten, low-income area like Bridgetown Haven, Malcolm just smiled. "I used to live in rooms where every sound was a warning," he said. "Here, I hear kids laugh. To me, that's freedom." Every Thursday evening, he would sit on the front steps of the center, callous hands folded, eyes fixed beyond the ivy-covered fence, watching the sky burn into sunset. People often paused as they passed, not because of who he used to be, but because he carried something the world was losing, a peace born from pain, and hope reborn from silence. That evening, Malcolm Easton was wiping the whiteboard in the main classroom of the Horizon Bridge Center when the door creaked open. A petite young woman stepped inside, worn-out backpack slung off one shoulder, curly hair tied back in a messy bun. It was Jada Marin's first visit to the center. She was 22, a senior sociology student at Bridgetown State, but her face, sharp, thoughtful, carrying a quiet fracture, showed she'd learned more from life than any syllabus could offer. Malcolm glanced over, then turned back to the board. His voice was low, measured, but not unkind. "You here for a class, or just need a place to breathe?" Jada blinked. That simple question pierced a truth she hadn't dared admit. She wasn't here for grades. She came because the cracks inside her were close to breaking. "Both," she replied softly. From that day forward, Jada came to Horizon Bridge every week. At first, to escape nights filled with her parents shouting. Then, gradually, she began staying after sessions, helping Malcolm stack chairs, tape up posters for skill workshops, and sometimes just sitting quietly, listening to him tell stories. In that steady voice everyone seemed to gravitate toward. Malcolm never pried into her life, but he watched closely, how she listened intently, how she gently held a panicked child mid-outburst, how she spent hours editing a slideshow for struggling high schoolers. Once, while changing a hallway light bulb, he turned and asked, "Jada, what do you think makes someone truly strong?" She thought for a moment, then said, "When they no longer feel the need to prove it." Malcolm nodded. This girl, she hadn't come here to be rescued. She came to rescue herself. Over time, the quiet college student became the second soul of the Horizon Bridge Center. She proposed a new class, writing for emotional expression, for teens prone to outbursts. She organized meetups between college students and high schoolers to expand perspective. She was also the first to speak up when an officer lingered outside the center, without reason. But what Malcolm admired most wasn't her talent. It was her heart. Jada never acted superior. She sat eye to eye with those who were struggling, not just to support them, but to remind them they were worth listening to. To Malcolm, Jada was the kind of light he thought he'd never see again. A next generation that not only listens, but knows when to stand. One day, he whispered it, more to himself than to anyone, "If I'm not around someday, that girl will keep the fire alive." And so, in a town many believed had long since faded, an unspoken, unbreakable bond was forged between a man shaped by shadows and a young woman who carried the light of hope. It was a warm afternoon. Golden sunlight filtered through the oak trees, casting long shadows across the front yard of the Horizon Bridge Center. Jada Marin was helping a group of students set up for a session on the power of words. She had just taped the slogan, "Speak with strength, not with fear," to the wall when the sound of a patrol engine cut through the quiet like thunder. A white and blue Ford Explorer rolled into the lot, its tires grinding over faded paint lines, not hurried but deliberate. Every eye turned. The car door opened, and out stepped a tall, broad-shouldered man in a Bridgetown PD uniform. Eyes cold as steel, smirk sharp with arrogance. Officer Kershaw, 40 years old, a name not unfamiliar in these parts, and not for good reasons. Malcolm stepped out from inside, hands still dusted with chalk, his brow furrowed, not in fear, but in recognition of the kind of man Kershaw was. The kind who wore a gun like a permission slip for intimidation. "Good afternoon, Mr. Easton," Kershaw called out, his voice dripping with stage politeness, as if addressing someone running an illegal operation. Malcolm gave a measured nod. His voice was steady. "We're hosting a skills workshop, just as noted in the notice we sent out last week." Kershaw's eyes swept across the children, then stopped at the poster Jada had just hung. He let out a dry chuckle. "Speak with strength, huh? Interesting motto. Just curious, are you teaching kids to speak up or to push back?" The air froze for a beat. Jada stood nearby, eyes blazing like a spark just caught flame, her lips pressed tight, ready to respond. But Malcolm tilted his head slightly. A familiar signal. Stay calm. "We teach them to stand firm in their voice," Malcolm said, low but deliberate. Not in fear. Kershaw took another step forward. His boot struck the tile with a sharp, deliberate clap. "I've received a few reports," he said. "Claims that this place is hosting unregulated gatherings. Might be in violation of community safety codes." Jada let out a quiet laugh. This time, she couldn't hold it back. Gatherings to teach kids how to be decent humans? Well, maybe the police should be the first ones in line. A few of the children giggled. Kershaw turned sharply to Jada, his expression darkening. But Malcolm stepped between them, his voice no longer gentle. "If you have a warrant, present it. Otherwise, if you're here just to throw weight around, you're not welcome in this center." Kershaw gave a dry smirk, saying nothing. He glanced around one last time, eyes scanning dismissive, then turned on his heel. Before climbing back into the cruiser, he muttered, "I'll be back, and I'll be watching this place. One wrong move, and it's shut down." The patrol car revved and pulled away, leaving behind a red dust trail and a silence heavy with tension. A seventh-grade girl whispered softly, "Why does he hate us, Mr. Easton?" Malcolm knelt down, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "Because this place teaches things some people don't want others to learn. Strength, dignity, and how to say no to injustice." Behind him, Jada stood with clenched fists, her knuckles pale. She knew the first battle had begun, and it wasn't about laws. It was about a world where kindness was treated like a threat. Less than 3 days after his first visit, Officer Kershaw returned. But this time, he didn't come alone. Alongside him was a younger officer, Officer Maddox, newly assigned to Bridgetown PD for barely 6 months. Tall, lanky, with a baby face still marked by uncertainty. He trailed behind Kershaw, eyes darting around the center like he was trying to memorize every detail. A sharp contrast to the heavy, arrogant stomp of the man ahead. That afternoon, Horizon Bridge Center was hosting an open discussion, led by Malcolm Easton himself. The kids sat in a circle on the wooden floor, listening closely as Malcolm spoke about the difference between fear and respect. Jada stood behind the mic station, occasionally adjusting the volume when Malcolm lowered his voice for emphasis. Then, the metal door swung open. The entire room paused. Kershaw stepped in first, his indifferent gaze sweeping across the space. Colin followed hesitantly, a beat behind. No one said a word, but the atmosphere shifted. The kids quietly turned to Malcolm, as if waiting to see what he'd do. "Looks like a fun little chat," Kershaw said, walking into the center of the room. "Heard Mr. Easton's got a gift for storytelling. Curious if he actually teaches anyone anything." Malcolm rose slowly, no surprise on his face. He stepped into the center of the room, eyes calm, as if staring down a math problem with a predictable answer. "Good afternoon, Officer Kershaw," he said evenly. "Are you here today to listen to a story or start one?" Kershaw smirked. "I'm here to remind you that places like this, they can be shut down easily. One little accident, one safety report. An accident like speaking without thinking?" Malcolm replied, his tone soft but with the edge of steel. Jada tightened her grip on her notepad, eyes locked on the officer standing in the center. And then it escalated. Kershaw suddenly shoved Malcolm. Hard. He stumbled back, hitting the corner of a wooden table. The room gasped. A young boy burst into tears. "Enough!" Jada shouted, rushing forward. But Malcolm had already steadied himself. One hand braced on the table, the other raised in a calming signal. No one responds in anger. Kershaw laughed, like he'd just won something. But Malcolm said nothing. He simply began walking toward Kershaw. Slow, measured, like sinking steps to a heartbeat. Just as Kershaw opened his mouth to sneer again, Malcolm moved. A clean pivot, a soft sidestep. He deflected Kershaw's hand and used the officer's own wrist to reverse the pressure, not with force, but with control. Kershaw staggered back, 3 full steps, his eyes wide with panic. The room was silent. Officer Maddox stood frozen, eyes wide. He had just witnessed something no police training ever taught. How a man could dismantle aggression without ever becoming aggressive. Malcolm released Kershaw's wrist like dust off his sleeve. "This is a place where people learn dignity," he said. "Not where you come to play games." A single clap rang out. No one knew who started it, but it spread, like fire catching dry grass. Slow, heavy, and loud. Kershaw's face flushed red. He looked at Colin, but found no support. Maddox remained still, his expression weighed down by something he didn't yet have words for. Finally, Kershaw turned to leave, but not without one last hiss through clenched teeth. "You'll regret this." But Malcolm didn't respond. And for the first time, the people inside Horizon Bridge Center didn't feel threatened. They felt inspired. If a man like him, once silent, could still choose to stand for what's right, then maybe we can all begin with one small action. If you believe that justice deserves to be told through stories like this one, subscribe to Mr. Seven Stories. As for Officer Maddox, he didn't know where he'd go after that afternoon, but he knew one thing. He had just witnessed a form of justice that didn't need handcuffs. It needed heart. That same afternoon, after Officer Kershaw stormed out of center in bitter defeat, something strange happened at Horizon Bridge. It felt like the whole place came alive. The tension still hung in the air, but for the first time, fear gave way to admiration. Kids who once hesitated now gathered around Malcolm Easton, not to ask, "Are you okay?" but to say things like, "I've never seen anyone stand that straight before. My daughter needs to know grown-ups like you exist." Jada stood quietly in the corner, still holding her phone, eyes locked on Malcolm, burning with pride. But deep down she knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. That evening, long after the center had emptied out, Jada stayed behind. She sat alone, opening her laptop and launching her editing software. One of the students had recorded the entire confrontation, Kershaw versus Malcolm, on their phone, and they had sent it to her. Jada rewound the footage again and again. The moment Malcolm turned, redirected Kershaw's wrist, and released him with the calm of a man who had survived things far worse than violence. No blood, no punches, just silence conquering arrogance. Jada straightened her back. At the end of the clip, she added a black screen. On it, in plain white letters, he didn't yell, he didn't hit, but the whole neighborhood stood for him. #StandWithEaston. Within 10 minutes of posting the video, it had 1,200 views. By sunrise, over 50,000. And the #StandWithEaston became a banner for those who had once been humiliated in silence by Kershaw and men like him. Then came the messages from people Jada had never met. A single mom recalling how Kershaw humiliated her during her child's vaccination. A teenager whose car was searched just because he wore a hoodie. Even an elderly mailman who'd been dragged from his truck just for driving slowly through Sycamore Crest. Each message was an old wound, and Jada, with her keyboard and firelit heart, began stitching them together. And if you, the one watching the story, have ever been treated unfairly, tell us your story in the comments. We read them. We listen. Jada created a simple website, a space where people could share their stories anonymously. She and a small team of student volunteers started collecting them, categorizing them, posting them each week. Within 5 days, #StandWithEaston was no longer a hashtag. It was a movement. Local TV, Channel 12 Civic Pulse News, picked up the story. One young anchor even called it a wave of justice that doesn't need a megaphone. At Horizon Bridge, classes still happened, but now they thrived under a new spirit, where children weren't just taught how to be kind. They were taught how to speak when they were treated unfairly. Malcolm saw it happening, and one night, passing the computer lab, he noticed Jada still awake, typing away at a new post. He tapped gently on the doorframe. "Jada," he said softly, "you're doing what I never dared to, getting people to rise not for you, but for themselves." She turned and smiled, the light from the screen glinting in her fiery eyes. "I'm just carrying forward what you started," she said. And this time, no one's staying silent. When a video of Malcolm Easton's swift counter-move went viral, and the #StandWithEaston ignited like wildfire in a dry field, there was one man in Bridgetown Haven who couldn't stand to watch it burn. Officer Kershaw, once a swaggering presence in Sycamore Crest, a symbol of unchecked authority, was now reduced to a joke online. Each comment, each applause emoji below the video, felt like a punch to his pride. He read them through gritted teeth. With cops like this, who needs criminals? That old man should be teaching at the police academy. Kershaw just got schooled by someone's grandpa. He couldn't take it. And when men like Kershaw, those addicted to power, feel cornered, they don't choose dialogue. They choose retaliation. Saturday night, a still, silent evening. The streetlights behind Horizon Bridge Center flickered as cold wind slipped through dusty window panes. The center had closed earlier than usual. Jada had to prep for a small press briefing with local news the next morning. Malcolm had left around 7 p.m., carrying freshly printed materials still warm with ink. That's when Kershaw made his move. No patrol car, no uniform, just a gray hoodie, a low-brim cap, and thick black gloves. He circled around to the back door, where the lighting was dim and the cameras were sparse. Then he pulled a slim crowbar from his coat and pried open the aging lock. No alarm, no loud noise, just a man, driven by spite, and a pitiful plan. If he couldn't win in the light, he'd destroy from the shadows. He ransacked the drawers, threw files to the floor. He tore posters, broke the legs off a wooden table, and finally ripped out the camera system's hard drive and smashed it against the floor with a bitter laugh, trying to teach people, Malcolm, let's see how they survive when there's nothing left to hold on to. Before leaving, he yanked the cable that powered the backup storage drive, hoping every shred of evidence would vanish. The next morning, when Jada unlocked the doors, she froze. Everything was wrecked. Children's drawings torn and scattered across the floor. Desks flipped. The projector screen shattered. And worst of all, the security system was wiped clean. She called Malcolm, her voice trembling. You have to come. We've been vandalized. And all the footage, it's gone. But in that moment of despair, Malcolm thought of one person, Ryan Reed Detmer, an IT student, Jada's friend, a sharp-eyed guy known for rescuing data like a trauma surgeon. Within 40 minutes, Ree arrived at the center, backpack slung over one shoulder, loaded with cables, flash drives, external drives, and a bag of snacks. No promises, he said, plugging in a SATA connector. But if there's a single bite of hope left, I'll find it. 3 hours passed. Jada and Malcolm sat in the old classroom, air thick with silence and tension. Then Ree looked up. A crooked smile crept across his face. Got it. There's a buffer copy still left on the secondary drive. It wasn't overwritten. And it caught the whole thing. Full shot of him breaking in. Face clear as day. The screen lit up. Shane Kershaw. No hat. No mask. His posture, movements, and expression. Undeniable. Malcolm looked at Ree. His eyes lit up for the first time in hours. You just saved a movement from being snuffed out. Jada said nothing. She simply opened her phone, launched her social media app, and typed, You can smash walls, break desks, tear up paintings, but you can't erase the truth. Hashtag StandWithEaston. By Monday morning, the video of Kershaw breaking into Horizon Bridge Center was spreading like a flash flood online, set against a somber piano track. Frame by frame showed him trashing drawers, toppling shelves, smashing computers. At the end, in bold white letters over a black screen, Jada had added, When power turns into destruction, truth becomes the strongest weapon. Hashtag StandWithEaston. Within 12 hours, the video aired on the morning news. Channel 12, Civic Pulse News. And this time, attention didn't stop at the poor neighborhoods of Bridgetown Haven. Mayor Claire Halden formally called for an internal investigation into the conduct of Officer Shane Kershaw. Across town, inside a cramped meeting room at Bridgetown PD, Officer Maddox sat still, eyes locked on his laptop screen. His hand trembled slightly as Kershaw's face came into view, not just a co-worker, but the man who had trained him during his first months on the force. No one in the department said it aloud, but the air was thick with it. Shane Kershaw had become a liability. Colin took a deep breath. He knew he couldn't pretend anymore. That evening at Jefferson Commons Park, the community held an emergency assembly. For the first time, city officials, media, and representatives from the mayor's office all showed up. Malcolm sat near the front, his face calm, but his eyes alert under the amber lights. Jada Marin sorted through folders, discussion boards, and speaker equipment. Ryan Detmer adjusted the projector setup, whispering to himself, Something big's about to go down tonight. And he was right. Just as the community entered the open mic portion, a silver pickup pulled in from the far end of the park. The door opened. Officer Colin Maddox stepped out. No badge, just a plain white shirt and jeans. In his hands, a thick manila envelope. No one looked more surprised than Malcolm. As Colin walked straight into the center of the circle, asked for the mic, and raised his head, "My name is Colin Maddox. I'm a police officer, and I'm not here to protect a colleague. I'm here to protect the truth." The crowd went breathless. Jada froze. An elderly woman from Ms. Lorraine Prescott's group leaned forward, clutching her daughter's hand. I stayed silent because I feared losing my job. Colin said, voice steady, "But after what you all did, I knew if I didn't speak up, I'd be no better than he is." He raised the envelope. Inside is a copy of an internal report, one that was hidden from the official record. I have proof that Officer Kershaw was reprimanded multiple times for abuse of power and was never held accountable. And I have the original footage of Mr. Easton being assaulted, backed up on the auxiliary system, before Kershaw destroyed the hard drive. The park erupted in applause. A man shouted from the crowd, "We're not alone anymore." Just then, a siren wailed. A patrol car screeched to a stop. Shane Kershaw stepped out, still in uniform, face flushed red with rage. He shouted, "Maddox, have you lost your damn mind?" But Colin didn't flinch. He stared his former colleague in the eye and replied firmly, "I'm not losing it. I just finally woke up." Silence swept across the crowd. Kershaw scanned the faces around him, but this time, not a single look of support. Every gaze locked onto him like a stain, not just on the department, but on the justice system itself. From the edge of the crowd, Mayor Claire Halden stepped forward. She took the envelope from Colin's hands. "We will investigate, publicly, and this time, no one will be covering for anyone." Malcolm stepped beside Colin, rested a steady hand on his shoulder. "You didn't just do the right thing, Colin. You reminded us that justice isn't some far-off idea. It begins with someone brave enough to stand up in a silent crowd." That night, as the amber lights of Jefferson Commons Park dimmed, no one rushed home. After Colin Maddox's courageous speech and Mayor Halden's promise of a full, transparent investigation, something shifted in Bridgetown Haven. The anger wasn't just about Shane Kershaw anymore. It had evolved into something deeper, more organized, a demand to overhaul the entire system of police oversight and accountability. By the next morning, Horizon Bridge Center had become a media magnet. Reporters packed the front steps. Tripods and cameras lined the sidewalks like a barricade made of lenses. Jada Marin, no longer just Malcolm's assistant, was now the community's unofficial media coordinator. She stood before the press in a T-shirt that read, "They said we were small, but the small are the ones who change the big." She declared, "We have dozens of stories, hundreds of pieces of evidence, proving that abuse of power here isn't about one bad cop. It's about a system that's allowed this for years. We demand an independent oversight committee for the entire city's police force." Mayor Halden hesitated, a seasoned politician. She had learned that silence was sometimes the safest option. But this time, the national broadcasts, the viral videos, the image of Colin Maddox standing alone as a new symbol of integrity left her no room to retreat. She called an emergency summit at Bridgetown City Hall, inviting representatives from neighborhoods, human rights groups, and senior police officials. Malcolm Easton sat in the front row, a small badge pinned to his chest. "I'm not here to speak. I'm here to listen." Then came the tension. A dramatic moment unfolded when a representative from the City Police Association, a man named Travis Harland, stood up and protested fiercely. "A public investigation will crush morale across the department. These civilians have no idea what pressure officers face every day." Malcolm didn't rise, but he raised his hand. The entire room turned to him. He spoke slowly. "I once lived in a place with no law, only guns. I understand pressure, but if the police want respect, they must stop using fear to get it." Applause erupted, And for the first time, no one cut him off. Right then, a reform proposal was put on the table. The Bridgetown Accountability Act. Formation of an independent civilian oversight board. Mandatory public release of internal disciplinary records. Required use of body cameras for all officers. Jada led the petition effort. In just 3 days, it gathered over 18,000 signatures, 3 times what was required. That afternoon, Malcolm sat alone on the front steps of the community center. He quietly stared at the neat stack of signed petitions in front of him. A light breeze lifted one corner of a page. Jada walked up, placed an iced tea next to him, and smiled. "We didn't just save the center, Uncle Malcolm. We're saving the soul of the city." Malcolm looked at her, his voice warm and soft. "We're not saving it, we're rebuilding it from the wreckage." 1 week after the town hall meeting, the Bridgetown Police Department issued an official statement. Officer Kershaw was placed on indefinite suspension, pending a full investigation and ethics review. The public applauded. The media called it a symbolic victory. But to Kershaw, it wasn't a sentence. It was a mirror. He returned to the small apartment at the end of Hawthorne Drive. Once, it was just a layover between night shifts. Now, it was the place where he faced himself. No badge, no gun, no power. In the first few days, Shane couldn't sleep. He was haunted by the sound of applause from a video, echoing every time he closed his eyes. He avoided mirrors, avoided familiar faces, avoided the morning light. But slowly in the quiet, he began to write, not to apologize to others, but to confront himself. Each sentence was a cut, but also a step. Every morning, he woke on time. But instead of his uniform, he wore an old T-shirt, made coffee with shaky hands, and opened the same comment thread beneath the video of his vandalism. "I thought I was the one maintaining order. Turns out I was the biggest disruption in someone else's life." He wrote that sentence in a notebook, a new habit born from the advice of a man named Malcolm Easton, a man he once tried to humiliate. One late afternoon, Shane Kershaw stood in front of Horizon Bridge Center. No patrol car, no handcuffs, just one man facing the place he once destroyed. Jada Marin saw him first. She started to approach, then paused. Malcolm was out. No one knew how he would react. Then the door creaked open. Malcolm stood there on the wooden steps, still holding a chalk-dusted cloth. The 2 men locked eyes and said nothing. Shane spoke first, his voice hoarse. "I didn't come for forgiveness. I just don't want to live the rest of my life without trying to make it right." Malcolm stayed silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Then start by saying nothing. Just do." He pushed the door open. Shane gave a small nod, then stepped inside, his eyes avoiding the wooden panels he once smashed apart, now carefully repaired. From that day on, Shane was no longer a cop. He was a guy fixing chairs, cleaning bathrooms, hauling heavy boxes of books, learning how to meet someone's eyes without making them flinch. At first, people were wary. Some avoided him. Some turned their backs outright. But Shane didn't give up. He stayed late to mop floors, wipe windows, and say, "Thank you," every time someone handed him a wet rag. A month later, at a community meeting, a 13-year-old boy named Maddox, the same kid Shane once threatened, stepped up, pointed at him, and said, "He used to scare me, but now he cleans the board so I can learn. I think anyone can change, if they really want to." The room applauded, not loudly, not theatrically, but with the cautious belief of a community that had been hurt before. Malcolm stood by the doorway, watching the golden light of late afternoon spill across the floor. Jada walked up and whispered, "Do you think he deserved forgiveness?" Malcolm answered, still gazing into the distance. "Forgiveness isn't so he can sleep better. It's so we can live lighter." By the following spring, Bridgetown Haven had changed in ways few had expected. On the front wall of the Horizon Bridge Center, once defaced with hate graffiti, now stood a nearly 20-foot mural. It showed Malcolm Easton sitting on the wooden steps, hand resting on his knee. Behind him, faces of all ages, all colors, A portrait of a community no longer afraid. The mural had no slogan. It didn't need one, because everything it stood for had already been lived. Jada, now the official coordinator of the center, led skill-building workshops, connected college mentors with inner-city teens, and organized seminars on community justice. She was even invited to speak at civil conferences in neighboring states, always bringing a single, clear message. We're not here for revenge. We're here to repair with truth and with each other. Shane Kershaw still came to the center every Saturday morning. No one asked him to, but he always showed up, sometimes to replace a light bulb, sometimes just to sit quietly in the back of a classroom, listening as the same kids who once trembled in front of him now spoke confidently about civic rights. Once, a little girl handed him a card. "Thank you for not leaving." Shane didn't respond. He just bowed his head and gripped the card tightly in both hands. It was the greatest lesson he'd ever received, and it hadn't come from any police academy. As for Malcolm, he had quietly stepped back, exactly the way he always preferred it. Not gone, just present in smaller, steadier ways. Instead of lecturing, he sat at the back of the room, tuning a speaker, helping a shy child write the first words in their journal. One time, someone asked if he had any regrets. He just smiled. "I used to live a life peering through scopes and listening through wiretaps. Now I get to hear kids laugh, loud and free, right in front of me. What could be better than that?" The hashtag StandWithEaston movement spread beyond Bridgetown. Other cities began holding community dialogues inspired by the Horizon Bridge model. National headlines read, "From silence to action, how one small neighborhood is teaching America to listen again." But for Malcolm, no title or article mattered, because every time he sat on that old front step, watching Jada lead a meeting, watching Shane fix a door, watching kids kick a soccer ball next to an old ice bucket, he knew true legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's who you lift up. And in the golden light falling over the center's roof, the echoes of unity, forgiveness, and trust played on like a song that doesn't need an ending. This story isn't just about a community center, a former agent, or a remorseful cop. It's a reminder that justice doesn't start in courthouses. It starts with how we treat each other every single day. Any one of us can be a Malcolm, quietly planting hope, or a Jada, a young person brave enough to step out of the shadows. Even a Shane, someone who got lost but didn't turn down the chance to make it right. Who were you in this story? We'd love to hear your thoughts below, because here at Mr. 7 Stories, we don't just tell stories. We listen. If you believe the world needs more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. And every week, you'll help us light a new flame for justice and compassion. Thank you for being with us, and we'll see you in the next story.